I knew looking at him was a sin, but I couldn't look away. I had sworn I would never fall for a priest. Never. Yet, there he was, Father Gabriel, leaning against the old oak in the small town square, sunlight catching the edges of his dark hair, making him look impossibly human. And I was powerless to resist. Even the way he tilted his head as he spoke to Mrs. Palmer about her parish duties, the gentle way he listened, made me feel something I wasn't supposed to feel. I'm Alara, a girl who's spent most of her life in quiet corners, sketchbook in hand, dreaming of someone noticing me. My world was predictable, school mornings filled with the scent of chalk and warm toast, helping Mom knead dough in the bakery as the yeast rose and smelled faintly of honey and flour, and long walks past the church where Gabriel preached, watching him from the distance, trying not to let my gaze linger too long. I often imagined what it would feel like to have someone see me the way he did. Not as the quiet girl in the back of the classroom, not as the baker's daughter who always had her nose in a sketchbook, but as someone worth noticing, worth remembering. Everything shifted the day our eyes met. He caught me staring once, and the way he held my gaze, it was like he could see right into the parts of me I didn't even understand. My stomach had dropped, my heartbeat thundered in my chest, and I had to turn away before my composure crumbled. But even as I walked home that afternoon, the memory of his eyes burned behind my eyelids. The town square was small, cobblestone streets glistening faintly from the morning dew. Children's laughter echoed from the fountain in the center, and shopkeepers were sweeping the steps of their stores, waving at neighbors. I should have been focused on errands or school, but instead, I found myself edging closer to the church, pretending to admire the flowers while stealing glances at him. He was talking to Mr. Hayes, the gruff old man who delivered the town's mail, but every so often, Gabriel's eyes flicked toward me. Just a glance. Not lingering, not obvious. But enough to make my pulse spike and my knees feel weak. I hated how much I wanted him. It wasn't just the way he looked, though that in itself was almost unbearable, the dark intensity in his eyes, the curve of his jaw, the way the sunlight caught his hair just right. No, it was the way he listened, truly listened. The way he didn't just nod politely while someone spoke, he leaned in, caught every word, smiled faintly at the little stories, and somehow made you feel like the center of his universe. And I hated it. Hated that he had that power over me, hated that I wanted it. It started with small, almost accidental encounters. I would pass the church on my way to school and see him arranging flowers on the altar, humming softly under his breath. My chest would tighten, and I'd catch my reflection in the stained glass windows, wondering if he could see me looking. Once, as I helped carry a tray of pies for a parish fundraiser, he reached out to steady my hand as I stumbled over the steps. His fingers brushed mine, just briefly, but my skin tingled for hours afterward. I had to remind myself, over and over, that this was forbidden. He was a priest. He had taken vows that I couldn't even pretend to understand. But desire is never convenient. It doesn't wait for the right time or the right person. It sneaks in, creeping up on you until it fills every corner of your mind. Every time Gabriel smiled at someone else, my stomach sank. Every time he laughed at a joke that wasn't mine, I felt a pang of jealousy I didn't want to admit, even to myself. And yet, I couldn't stop noticing him, couldn't stop longing for a chance to be close. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a warm spring afternoon, the air scented with fresh grass and the faint tang of baking bread from Mom's shop. I had stayed late after school, sketchbook in hand, wandering the park behind the church. I was drawing the way the sunlight hit the old oak trees, trying to capture something I couldn't name, when I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, my hand gripping the pencil, heart thundering. Alara. I turned, startled, and there he was. Gabriel. So close that I could see the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his hair had fallen slightly over his forehead. He looked concerned. And that concern, as it always did, cut straight through me. "You'll catch a cold," he said softly, noticing the light drizzle that had started falling. His voice was low, comforting, and something in it made my pulse quicken. I tried to respond, tried to find words, but my throat had dried, my mind blank except for the impossible desire burning inside me. He stepped closer, offering his coat. My fingers brushed the soft fabric, and I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to confess everything. But I didn't. I could barely breathe. I could barely exist without wanting him, yet I couldn't let him know. Not yet. "Thank you," I whispered, barely audible. His gaze lingered on me for a moment too long. I felt like I was melting under the weight of it, a dangerous, delicious heat that left me trembling. And then, just as quickly, he looked away, back toward the park path, speaking to someone passing by as if nothing had happened. My heart ached in a way I didn't want to name. From that day on, I became hyper-aware of every little detail. The way he laughed, the way he paused mid-sermon, the faint scent of cedar on his coat, the quiet warmth in his voice when he spoke to me. I started imagining scenarios where none of it was forbidden, where I could lean into him without fear, where his eyes could betray his heart as mine betrayed mine. And with each imagined moment, the tension grew unbearable. I started noticing how the townspeople reacted to him, too. The way Mrs. Palmer's hands would tremble as she poured him tea, the shy way little Maggie would sneak an extra cookie for him when no one was watching. It was as if everyone in the town felt his presence like an electric current, yet only I felt the pull of something more. I hated it. I hated how alone it made me feel, how impossible it was to tell anyone. I had no one to confide in, no one who could understand this dangerous, intoxicating tension between us. There were nights I lay awake, sketchbook open but untouched, imagining him walking down the cobblestone streets, imagining his hand brushing against mine, imagining the warmth of his breath as he leaned closer in a whispered confession. And with each imagined scenario, I felt more trapped in my own longing, more desperate, more consumed by the need to feel him near. Every interaction became a gamble. Would he notice my glance? Would he smile? Would he speak to me in that voice that made my knees weak? I became a student of subtlety, studying the way he moved, the rhythm of his footsteps, the slight inflections in his voice when he said my name. And the more I noticed, the more impossible it became to stay away. But the fear of being discovered, of letting my emotions slip through the carefully constructed barriers, haunted me constantly. What if someone saw the way I looked at him? What if my brother, who always seemed to know everything, noticed the way my heart leapt when Gabriel approached? What if I ruined everything? And yet, even with the fear, even with the guilt, even with the knowledge that this was wrong, my heart betrayed me over and over. I watched him from behind the bakery window, saw him greet a stranger with the same warmth he gave me, and my chest tightened with longing and jealousy. I would walk past him, pretending not to notice, pretending not to hear the soft murmur of his prayers that seemed to reach across the street and into my soul. Sometimes, I imagined daring to speak, to tell him that I couldn't help the way I felt. But every time, the image of his vows, the weight of his commitment, stopped me cold. I had to remind myself that desire could be dangerous, that longing could destroy everything if I gave in too soon. And yet, every time our eyes met, even by accident, I felt the pull, stronger and more insistent, as if the universe itself was conspiring to break the rules we were supposed to follow. The tension built like a storm waiting to break. Every glance, every accidental touch, every faint smile became an electric charge that left me shaking long after the moment passed. I hated that he had this power over me, yet I craved it in equal measure. And I knew, deep down, that the moment I gave in, even just a little, I would never be able to turn back. Even the quietest days were dangerous. A shared glance in the pews during Sunday service, a fleeting touch when passing the flower beds, a laugh that lingered too long in the air, all of it made my pulse race. And every night, I lay in bed replaying the moments, analyzing his every movement, wondering if he felt the same impossible pull I did. There were nights I caught him watching me too. I would see him through the church's stained glass, his eyes dark and unreadable, and my stomach would twist in anticipation. Did he feel the same? Was it possible that he, too, was struggling with forbidden desire? Or was I imagining it, trapped in my own longing? The suspense was unbearable, the rehooks endless, each moment drawing me deeper into a dangerous, thrilling obsession I couldn't resist. I hated it. Hated that I wanted him. Hated that I couldn't stop thinking about him. Hated that every part of me, every heartbeat, every sketch I made, was consumed by him. And yet, I knew that my life would never be the same. The moment our eyes met, the moment he held my gaze, something irreversible had begun. It started small. Stolen glances during Sunday service, accidental brushes when I helped set up community events, my heart hammering every time he smiled at me. I hated how much I wanted him. Every time his hand hovered near mine, even by accident, my chest tightened, and I reminded myself, this was forbidden. He wasn't mine. Then one rainy afternoon changed everything. I was running to escape the downpour, sketchbook clutched to my chest, and I slipped near the chapel steps. Gabriel appeared, his coat suddenly around my shoulders, eyes searching mine with worry. "You'll catch a cold," he murmured. His voice was low, comforting, but something in it shook me. Something unspoken lingered there. I couldn't respond. All I could do was stare, breath trembling, heart betraying every rational thought. That was the spark, the moment I realized my feelings weren't going anywhere. And maybe, neither were his. Days passed, and with each one, the tension between us thickened, almost like the air itself had become heavier whenever he was near. Every interaction became charged with unspoken longing, each glance or fleeting smile setting off a storm inside me that I could neither name nor control. It was maddening, like a heartbeat echoing too loudly inside a hollow room. I caught him watching me sometimes, just for a heartbeat longer than appropriate, and it sent shivers down my spine. My cheeks would heat instantly, and I would force myself to look away, pretending I was busy, pretending I didn't notice the way his eyes held mine like a secret only we shared. It was impossible to ignore. He moved through the town like a presence that made the ordinary extraordinary. Even in crowded rooms, at the Sunday service, the bakery, the local market, he seemed aware of me in ways no one else could see. Sometimes, I imagined him noticing the smallest details, the way my fingers fidgeted when I was nervous, the way my hair always fell slightly across my eyes, the way I tilted my head when I was thinking too hard about something trivial. And the thought that he noticed me in ways no one else did, it made my heart ache. But then came the complication. His vows. His commitment. The life he had chosen when he became Father Gabriel. The life he had dedicated entirely to others, a life in which there was no room for a girl like me, no room for my longing, no room for the storm of feelings that churned between us. I started imagining what it would mean to confess my feelings, even in the quiet corners of my mind. I imagined him pausing mid-sermon, looking down at me with that intensity that always left me breathless, and I imagined telling him everything, how I thought about him constantly, how my chest ached every time he smiled at someone else, how I hated that I wanted him so badly. And every scenario ended in heartbreak. I could see it so clearly in my mind, his eyes flickering with guilt and pain, the weight of his vows pressing him away from me, the impossibility of what I wanted. Even in my daydreams, I could never cross the line without consequence. I hated it, hated the cruel precision with which reality reminded me that desire was not enough. And yet, every day, I found myself drawn closer, each interaction pulling me further into a web I had no idea how to escape. Jealousy crept in too. Subtle at first, like the shadow of a cloud crossing the sun. Sister Claire, a visiting nun who had come to help with parish work for the festival, always seemed to be around him. She laughed at his jokes in a way that made my chest tighten, leaned just slightly too close when they spoke, touched his arm when it wasn't necessary, and I hated myself for noticing it. Hated myself for the way my pulse spiked, for the way my stomach twisted into knots, for the heat of irrational rage that made me want to disappear from her sight entirely. It wasn't rational, of course. I reminded myself repeatedly that she wasn't a threat, that Gabriel had never looked at her the way he looked at me, even the times I caught his lingering gaze were brief, hidden, but more dangerous for it. And yet, the shadow of rivalry, however imagined, made my chest ache in a way that left me dizzy, like I had been running and suddenly stopped mid-stride. I hated the feeling, hated the truth of it, I wanted him too much. I wanted him so badly that the idea of anyone else, even a visiting nun, sharing his attention felt like betrayal. And the guilt of it? That was unbearable too. Then, the evening came that changed everything, or at least made it impossible to pretend anymore. The town festival, bathed in golden light from strings of lanterns and festooned with ribbons that fluttered in the cool night breeze. The smell of roasted chestnuts and baked goods drifted through the air, mingling with the faint scent of pine and distant smoke from small bonfires set up along the square. Children ran around laughing, chasing each other under the twinkle of lantern light, while the townspeople moved slowly, savoring the warmth of the festival and the soft, magical glow that seemed to settle over everything. I was carrying a lantern for the parish decoration committee, my fingers gripping the handle tightly, trying not to let it sway too much, when I saw him approaching from across the square. My stomach dropped into my shoes at the sight of him. He moved with that same quiet confidence, a presence that made the festival lights flicker in my vision, making everything else fade into the background. My heart began to pound, my palms slick with sweat despite the cool night air, and I felt the familiar ache, the pull that had grown impossibly stronger over the past days, months maybe, though I dared not count. He stopped beside me, a shadow of hesitation in his posture, and I felt my pulse slam against my ribs. The way he looked at me, eyes dark, intense, searching, made it impossible to breathe normally. "Alara, you shouldn't feel like this," he said, his voice low, almost pained, carrying a weight that made the night around us feel too heavy, too intimate. I can't be what you need." My stomach dropped. The words hit me like ice water. The ache in my chest twisted into something sharper, a fear I hadn't yet named. But even as the despair clawed at me, my voice betrayed me, trembling and small. "But why do I feel like you already are?" He turned away, letting out a long sigh that seemed to carry every ounce of struggle and restraint he had been holding inside. I watched him wrestle with his own forbidden desire, the conflict etched across his face, the way his fingers twitched almost unconsciously, betraying the battle between duty and longing. It was unfair. It was impossible. And yet, every instinct in me told me that there was something there, something dangerous, something forbidden but undeniable. And then it happened, a small, almost accidental moment that shattered all my attempts at composure. He handed me a lantern, fingers brushing mine. Just a touch, brief, almost nothing. And yet, the world seemed to tilt. The festival lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. My knees went weak. My chest tightened until I felt as though I couldn't draw a full breath. I wanted to pull back, to tell myself it meant nothing, but instead, I felt drawn in, closer, my fingers lingering just a fraction too long over his. The tension between us was unbearable, electric, crackling like a live wire under our skin. I could feel the pull of his presence, the silent gravity that seemed to draw us together in ways neither of us could control. Every small gesture, every accidental brush, every flicker of his eyes toward mine became a new hook in the endless cycle of desire and restraint. And yet, fear lingered, fear that one wrong move, one misread glance, could unravel everything. I wanted to say something, anything, to make the night stretch into something more than a fleeting, impossible moment. But I couldn't. My voice was gone, trapped somewhere between hope and fear. My heart, however, did not obey. It surged forward, betraying every carefully constructed thought, every attempt at rationality. He seemed aware of it too. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands as he held the lantern. He was wrestling with himself, battling vows and commitment, struggling against a pull he could not name, but could not ignore. And in that instant, the world narrowed to us, his hand, my hand, the fragile connection sparked by something more than coincidence, more than proximity. The festival sounds, the laughter of children, the music, the distant shouts of vendors, faded into background noise. The only thing that existed was the space between us, the brush of his fingers, and the weight of everything we both wanted but could not allow ourselves to claim. My chest ached with it, every heartbeat a reminder that desire could be as sweet as it was cruel. And then the fear crept back in. What if someone saw? What if I was caught in a moment I could never explain? What if this spark, this dangerous pull, was a beginning that could only end in heartbreak? The thought twisted in my stomach, made my hands shake as I gripped the lantern, and yet, I could not step away. Not entirely. I was caught between the thrill of proximity and the terror of consequence. I hated myself for wanting him. Hated myself for hoping, for imagining, for daring to think that he might feel the same. And yet, even as fear threatened to drive me back into safety, my heart betrayed me again, pulling me closer with every accidental touch, every glance, every breath shared under the golden glow of the festival lights. It was impossible. It was unfair. It was dangerous. And yet, it was the only thing I wanted. Then came the twist. A single, ordinary morning that would shatter everything I thought I understood about my world. I was sitting at the edge of my bed, sketchbook open on my lap, the faint golden light of dawn streaming through the curtains and catching the edges of my drawings. My pencil hovered above the page, unsure whether to trace the lines I had started or to erase them entirely. The night before had been restless, dreams filled with shadows and whispers of him, his voice, his eyes, the warmth of his coat around me in the rain. And then I saw it. A folded piece of paper, tucked between the pages of my sketchbook, one I hadn't noticed before. My heart skipped. I froze for a heartbeat, a trembling in my chest that made me almost drop the sketchbook entirely. How had I missed this? I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, but the subtle, careful curves, the rhythm of the letters, became unmistakable in an instant. It was his. Gabriel's. Hands shaking, I unfolded it. The paper felt impossibly fragile in my grip, like it held the weight of something sacred, something dangerous. And then I began to read. The words hit me like a tidal wave. Every line carved straight into my chest. He had written it, pouring onto the page everything he shouldn't feel, everything he couldn't say aloud, every pulse of longing, every ache of forbidden desire. Alara, it began, and my chest tightened immediately, the sound of my own heartbeat filling my ears. I cannot tell anyone. I cannot risk it. But you must know, in the silence of my prayers, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. I love you. I have never loved anyone this way, and it terrifies me. I know the world would never forgive this. And yet, when you are near, I am human in a way I have never allowed myself to be. Every glance, every brush of your hand, every laugh, it is all I think about, all I crave. I wish I could hold you, but I cannot. I wish I could tell you everything, but I must protect you from the consequences. And I will do anything to keep you safe, even if it means keeping my heart from you. Tears blurred my vision. My hands shook so violently that I had to clutch the sketchbook to my chest. My entire being hummed with relief, hope, and joy, all tangled together in a knot that made my stomach lurch. He loved me. He really, truly loved me. After all the longing, all the impossible tension, all the stolen glances and quiet moments that had defined the last months of my life, he felt it too. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to hold him and never let go, to tell him that it didn't matter, that I didn't care about the rules or the vows or the consequences. My heart soared with the promise that maybe, just maybe, this impossible thing we both desired could exist, if only we were brave enough. And then it all shattered. Because the letter, the precious confession meant only for me, had been seen by someone else. Someone I hadn't considered, someone I had never imagined interfering in the fragile, secret world that existed between us. My younger brother. The memory hit like a punch to the gut. I remembered him rifling through my things months ago, looking for a misplaced notebook or perhaps just curious, and I had dismissed it as nothing. I had no idea that in that brief moment of intrusion, he had discovered the truth of what had been simmering silently between Gabriel and me. My chest tightened, a cold dread settling over me like a heavy fog. The consequences, when they arrived, were inevitable. And then the confrontation happened. Inevitably, mercilessly, cruelly. It was the bakery. My sanctuary, the one place I had always felt safe and warm, filled with the scent of fresh bread, yeast, and sugar. The morning sunlight streamed in through the front windows, casting long, warm beams over the counters, but the light did nothing to chase away the cold terror that filled the room the moment he appeared. Gabriel. He looked at me with eyes full of fear and guilt, the same intensity that had always drawn me in, now cutting straight through me like a knife. Alara, his voice was low, trembling slightly. There was a weight in it, a weight of sorrow, a weight of impossibility. I wanted to protect you. You can't love me like this. It will ruin everything. I couldn't speak at first. My lips parted, and nothing came out, not a sound, not a word, just the tremor in my hands, the ache in my chest, and the slow, terrifying realization that our fragile world, the one I had cherished in secret, the one that had existed only in stolen moments and lingering glances, was collapsing. I don't care about everything, I whispered finally, tears streaming down my cheeks, blurring my vision of the warm bakery, the counters, the loaves cooling on the racks. I just want you. His head dropped slightly, and he looked away, as if the weight of my words, the dangerous truth of my longing, was almost too much to bear. The struggle etched into every line of his face, the war between duty and desire, was unbearable to witness. And yet, it was undeniable. We were both trapped in the same impossible predicament, the same cruel tension, and now the fragile balance had been broken. The breakup, when it came, was cruel and immediate. There was no drawn-out argument, no attempt at negotiation, no whispered promises in the shadows. Just the quiet, piercing finality of his gaze, the way he avoided looking directly at me as he left the bakery, and the echo of his footsteps fading into the street outside. I wanted to call him back, to beg him to stay, to promise that nothing else mattered, but the words lodged in my throat. I avoided him after that. The town seemed emptier without his presence, the cobblestone streets duller, the bakery's warmth hollow. Each morning, as I prepared pastries and bread for the early customers, I would glance at the chapel, hoping, foolishly, that he might appear, even for a fleeting second. But he never did. The air felt heavier without him, the town smaller, my world narrower. My sketches lost their vibrancy, my lines shaky, my colors muted. Everything I had once captured with joy seemed flat, devoid of life, without the invisible spark he had always brought to my days. I tried to focus on myself, on my art, on my dreams, on the small victories that had always made my life bearable. I forced myself to practice, to draw landscapes, to capture the gentle sway of trees or the way sunlight hit the rooftops. But every street corner, every scent of fresh bread drifting from the bakery, every brush of wind across the town square reminded me of him. Even mundane things became unbearable triggers. The sound of church bells, normally comforting, now rang in my ears like a reminder of what I had lost. The sight of his coat left hanging in the vestry when he came to organize parish events made my chest ache. I could not escape him, though I desperately tried. He haunted every corner of my life, every fragment of my memory, every beat of my restless heart. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing the shapes in the plaster and imagining him there instead, leaning over me, speaking softly, his fingers brushing against mine. My tears would fall silently into the darkness, and I would wonder how someone so forbidden could occupy my thoughts so completely, so relentlessly. And the letter itself became a phantom, a ghost that haunted me endlessly. I would touch the pages, reread the words, tremble at the thought that someone else, my brother, innocent and well-meaning in his curiosity, had witnessed what I was never supposed to share. The betrayal was not intentional, but it felt just as sharp, just as cruel. Everything we had kept secret, everything fragile and precious, had been exposed in a way that could not be undone. I hated the helplessness. Hated the way my heart still longed for him, even after he had tried to protect me from it. Hated the way every ordinary task, every ordinary place, reminded me of him. And yet, there was a stubborn spark that refused to die, the hope, the longing, the dangerous thrill of the connection we had shared in secret. I began to notice the small ways I betrayed myself. The way I lingered near the chapel, pretending to admire the flowers. The way I watched the town square from the bakery window, half expecting him to appear. The way my sketches began to reflect shadows of longing, blurred lines, and half-finished figures that seemed to echo the impossibility of what I felt. Even in trying to move on, I could not. The ache was too deep, the pull too strong. And somewhere in the quiet corners of my heart, I knew that this story, our story, was far from over. It was only paused, waiting for the right moment to ignite again, to test the boundaries of duty, desire, and love. Months passed. Slow, heavy months that moved like molasses, stretching days into weeks, and weeks into a rhythm of quiet, cautious healing. At first, the emptiness was suffocating. The town seemed hollow without him, every familiar corner a reminder of absence, every familiar sound a ghost whispering his name. The bakery, the place where I had always felt grounded, felt like a stage I could no longer inhabit. My sketches were muted, the lines tentative, the colors pale. Even the small joys of life, which had once been enough, now felt fragile, fleeting, inadequate. Healing was not a single moment. It was a series of tiny, almost imperceptible victories. I learned to let my heart breathe again, to find solace in my own company, to allow myself small pleasures without the sharp ache of longing immediately following. I walked through the town slowly, savoring the smell of fresh bread, the warmth of sunlight on the cobblestones, the laughter of children chasing one another across the square. I tried to focus on these things, to stitch together fragments of my happiness, to convince myself that I could exist without the impossible weight of desire pressing against my chest every waking moment. And I began to notice small things I had ignored before, how the frost glistened on the edges of windows, how the river near the chapel shimmered under the pale morning light, how the scent of pine from the nearby woods mingled with the earthy smell of winter approaching. These small miracles became my companions, my solace, my quiet reminder that life went on even when my heart had been broken in ways that felt irreparable. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It was the first snowfall of the year. Delicate flakes drifted lazily from the gray sky, melting on rooftops, piling along the edges of the square, and dusting the branches of the old oak that had witnessed so many of my private moments with him. I walked slowly, my boots crunching softly on the fresh snow, hands tucked into the pockets of my coat, sketchbook under my arm. The town was quieter than usual, muffled by the falling snow, every sound softened, every movement slowed. It felt almost like a world suspended in time, a moment of fragile beauty I could savor alone, or so I thought. And then I saw him. Gabriel. He was standing under the streetlight outside the church, coat dusted with snow, shoulders squared, yet somehow relaxed. The golden glow of the light made the snowflakes melt into tiny rivers that slid down the fabric, but his presence remained impossibly real, impossibly human, impossibly heartbreaking. My breath caught in my throat, and for a heartbeat, I froze where I stood. My heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to escape, my chest tight with anticipation and fear, my mind teetering on the edge of disbelief. And then, as if time itself had chosen this moment for its own cruelty, or its own mercy, his eyes found mine. Just like that. Just like it had always been. The cold air seemed to sharpen the ache in my chest, the snowflakes clinging to my eyelashes like tiny crystals of suspended hope. And in that instant, all the months of healing, of convincing myself that I could exist without him, fell away. The ache returned, but it was different now. It was a mix of relief, longing, and the impossible thrill of recognition. Some connections, I realized, could not be severed by fear or by time. I shouldn't be here, he whispered, voice low, almost swallowed by the hush of the snowfall, yet somehow more intimate than anything I had heard before. There was a hesitation in it, a vulnerability that was entirely new, entirely human, entirely irresistible. You already are, I said, stepping closer despite the cold, despite the careful boundaries my mind wanted to maintain. My cheeks stung as the icy flakes landed on my skin, but I welcomed it. I wanted to feel something other than the dull ache of months spent apart. I wanted to feel alive again. My heart, stubborn and reckless, led me forward, and I let it. The silence stretched between us, full of unspoken words, full of months of longing and regret, full of the tension that had always defined our impossible connection. I noticed the small details I had missed before, the way the snow clung to his eyelashes, the faint tremor in his fingers, the way his coat hung loosely from his shoulders, as if he had forgotten to straighten it in his rush to come to me. And I realized, in a moment that felt like a secret shared only by the world and the falling snow, that he had come for me. That he had found his way back, despite everything. He took my hand then, careful, hesitant, as if afraid that the touch might shatter us both, or perhaps afraid that the world would finally intrude upon our fragile moment. My fingers curled instinctively around his, the warmth of his skin seeping into me, chasing away the chill that had settled deep into my bones over the past months. For the first time, he let himself be seen fully, no walls, no vows keeping us apart, no masks. Only the raw, undeniable truth of the connection that had always existed between us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't conventional. It wasn't even safe in the way the world would define it. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the way his gaze held mine, the way his presence filled the space around us, the way my heart had remembered this feeling even when I had tried to forget it. I noticed the small details of his vulnerability, the slight quiver of his lips, the way his eyes softened when they met mine, the unsteady breath that he tried to disguise. And in these small cracks in his armor, I saw him, Gabriel, human, fallible, and completely, impossibly real. I saw the man I had longed for in secret, the one who had haunted my sketches, my thoughts, my dreams, and now stood before me, under the pale glow of a streetlight, surrounded by the quiet magic of the first snow. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me, a sound of disbelief, relief, and joy all tangled together. The sound made him smile, faint, almost shy, and it sent another jolt through my chest. The snow swirled between us, the world muted, the streets empty, and I realized how improbable it all was, how fragile the timing, how delicate the balance that had brought us here. And yet, here we were. Do you really feel that? I asked softly, not trusting my voice to be louder than a whisper. He nodded, eyes locked on mine, and I could see the truth there, in the unguarded vulnerability, in the hesitation that belied certainty. I feel it. Every day, every moment I was away. I tried to fight it, to follow the path I was meant to follow, but it never worked. Not once. Not for a single heartbeat. The cold nipped at my cheeks, my nose, my fingers, but I barely noticed. I was entirely consumed by the pull of his presence, the dangerous thrill of the connection we had tried so hard to deny, the electric tension that surged through the simple act of holding hands. The snowflakes melted against our skin, water dripping, freezing again in tiny rivulets along the edge of my sleeve. But it didn't matter. The world had narrowed to this small, frozen circle around us, and for once, the impossible felt tangible, touchable, real. I felt a shiver that wasn't from the cold, a tremor that ran through my chest and down my spine, and I realized that the months of heartache, the slow, agonizing healing, had been a prelude to this moment. Each day apart had sharpened the clarity of what I wanted, what I needed. And now, with his hand in mine, the impossibility of it all faded, replaced by something stubborn, undeniable, breathtaking. He squeezed my hand gently, as if testing whether the connection was real, whether I would step back, whether the world would intervene. I didn't. I let the cold sting my cheeks, let the snow cling to my hair, let my heart guide me entirely, and I stepped closer. Some connections, they don't care about fear, I whispered. Or rules. Or time. They just exist. He nodded again, silent, letting the snowfall and the night speak for him, letting the months of longing, of impossible desire, of heartbreak and separation, dissolve in the quiet intimacy of our hands entwined, of eyes locked across the gentle glow of streetlight and snow. For the first time, it felt like possibility, like hope, like the fragile magic that comes only when two hearts refuse to give up, even when the world insists they must. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a story anyone else could understand. But it was ours. And sometimes, I realized, love doesn't follow rules. Sometimes, it just exists, stubborn, impossible, undeniable, breathtaking. And in that moment, the snow swirling around us like whispered confessions, I knew, deep in my bones, that no months apart, no fear, no vows, could sever the bond that had always existed. Not truly. Not ever. As we walked through the silent, snow-dusted streets, my boots crunching softly against the pristine white, I could feel the cold seeping into my coat, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except him, Gabriel. His hand in mine was warm, steady, a grounding force I hadn't realized I'd been craving for months. Each step we took seemed to echo in the quiet town, the distant church bells muffled by the thick blanket of snow, the streetlights casting halos around our figures that made us look like we had stepped out of some impossible dream. I glanced at him, careful not to let my heart betray my thoughts, and saw him looking back at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. There was no hesitation in his eyes now, no walls or deflections, only the raw, undeniable truth of what had always existed between us. For the first time, months of heartache, longing, and impossible restraint seemed worth it, because here he was, fully present, fully human, and entirely mine in that stolen, golden moment. I realized, then, how much I had grown. How much the months apart had changed me. I had learned to find joy in my own company, to let my heart breathe, to recognize that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. And yet, choosing him now didn't feel like a betrayal of that growth, it felt like the natural extension of it. Choosing honesty, choosing to be true to my heart, meant choosing him. Every beat of my chest, every quiet exhale, every pulse of warmth that ran through my fingers when they touched his, affirmed that decision. The streets were empty, and the world seemed to hold its breath around us. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, melting as they touched our coats and hair, tiny reminders of the fragile magic that surrounded this moment. I could hear the distant murmur of the river, muffled by the snow, the soft creak of trees under the weight of frost, even the occasional flurry of a stray snowflake hitting the cobblestone. The silence was complete, almost sacred, as if the town itself had paused to witness this impossible reunion, this stubborn defiance of rules, of fears, of expectations. We didn't speak much at first. Words seemed unnecessary when every glance, every touch, every heartbeat carried volumes. My fingers intertwined with his more confidently now, no longer hesitant, no longer testing boundaries. His thumb traced gentle circles over the back of my hand, and I felt my chest swell with a mix of relief and exhilaration, a sense of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in forever. "I can't believe we're here," I whispered finally, my breath clouding in the cold air. My voice trembled, fragile and soft, but it carried a weight I hadn't expected. It was the voice of someone who had survived heartbreak, who had endured months of longing and fear, and had finally chosen courage over restraint. Gabriel smiled faintly, a small, almost shy curve of lips that made my heart skip. "Neither can I," he said. His voice was low, intimate, full of the human imperfection that made him irresistible, that made me ache for him even in the darkest moments of our separation. I never stopped, not for a moment. The confession, though simple, sent another jolt through me. Months of imagining, of yearning, of stolen thoughts and half-formed dreams, crystallized in that single, delicate statement. Every time he had avoided me, every time he had turned away to protect both of us, it had been a battle with the same truth that now stood plainly between us: we were meant to find each other, regardless of the obstacles, regardless of the world's judgment. As we continued to walk, the snow swirling around us like whispered confessions, I noticed the way the light caught his hair, the edges shimmering like gold against the gray of the night. I noticed the subtle curve of his jaw, the way his eyes softened whenever they met mine, the way his steps unconsciously slowed to match mine, as if we were bound by some invisible rhythm, some ancient, unspoken understanding. And in that quiet observation, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. Some connections, no matter how forbidden or complicated, cannot be erased by time, by fear, by distance. They are stubborn, persistent, and entirely undeniable. I wanted to speak again, to articulate all the months of longing, all the nights spent imagining him, all the heartbreak that had led to this fragile reunion. But words seemed inadequate. Instead, I let my hand tighten around his, let my heart lead, let the warmth of his presence communicate what I could not. The snow continued to fall, each flake a tiny miracle, each step a heartbeat in a story we had been writing in secret for months. My mind wandered to all the moments we had lost, the stolen glances, the brushes of fingers, the nights I had dreamed of him standing there, the rain-soaked confessions, the letters, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the longing that had made me question everything I thought I knew about love. And now, here we were, alive, together, fragile but unbroken. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel guilty for looking at someone's eyes and seeing my own heart reflected there. There was no shame, no hesitation, no fear of judgment. Only the stubborn, breathtaking truth that we had survived everything the world threw at us: distance, rules, vows, separation, heartbreak, and had found our way back to each other. The golden glow of the streetlights, the soft hush of falling snow, the quiet town holding its breath around us, it all felt cinematic, impossible, like the kind of moment that existed only in stories. And yet, it was real. More real than anything I had experienced in months of solitude and self-reflection. More real than the ache of longing that had haunted me. More real than anything else in the world. Gabriel squeezed my hand gently, and I felt the warmth radiate up my arm, settling into my chest, anchoring me to the moment, to him, to us. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, voice low, filled with the gravity of someone who has fought his own desires, his own fears, and finally chosen truth over everything else. "Not now. Not ever." I smiled, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, and leaned slightly into him, letting the snowflakes settle on my hair, letting the cold bite my cheeks, letting my heart be entirely, recklessly alive. "Then neither am I," I murmured. "I choose you. Every day. In every way I can." The night stretched around us, infinite and quiet, and yet charged with the electricity of what we had rediscovered. There was no need for explanation, no need for justification, no need for the world to understand. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was us, stubborn, undeniable, breathtaking, imperfect, and entirely ours. And as we walked further down the empty streets, hand in hand, hearts in sync, the snow swirling like whispered promises around us, I knew that this was what love was meant to feel like, unrestrained, courageous, and entirely human. It didn't follow rules, it didn't adhere to expectations, it didn't wait for approval. It existed because it had to exist, because it could not be denied, because some connections are eternal, unbreakable, and impossible to ignore. And in that suspended, golden moment, I couldn't help but wonder how many of us spend our lives denying the impossible, the undeniable, the breathtaking. How many moments pass us by because we fear judgment, rejection, or the weight of consequences? And how often do we miss the chance to choose honesty, to follow our hearts, to claim the love that has always been ours to claim? I don't have all the answers. But I do know this, in that snow-dusted town, with the lights glowing softly, with Gabriel's hand in mine, I finally understood the simple truth. Some loves cannot be extinguished. Some hearts cannot be silenced. And some connections, no matter how impossible, stubbornly, breathtakingly exist. So now, I turn to you, listening, watching, imagining this world with me. What would you have done in my place? Would you have waited? Would you have fought? Or would you have let fear dictate your heart? If this story touched you, if it stirred even the smallest flutter in your chest, I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me what you think. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in the impossible. Like if your heart skipped a beat somewhere along the way, and don't forget to subscribe for more love stories that defy the rules, defy expectations, and remind us why some connections are simply undeniable. Because sometimes, love doesn't follow rules. Sometimes, it just exists, stubborn, breathtaking, and completely, wonderfully human.